So we'll now go ahead and jump into Chapter 12, Media Theory and Research, Part 2. So your chapter talks a lot and does a great job of explaining the spiral of silence, the third person effect, as well as the role of limited effects research. All of this stuff is really important, but for the sake of time and your attention span, I'm going to focus the rest of this conversation on understanding the audience as well as cultural studies, and then we'll end on a conversation about qualitative and quantitative research. So, understanding audiences. To a certain extent, mass communications research has always been about trying to understand the audience. For advertising and PR, knowing how the audience thinks and how to persuade it can make or break a campaign or a new brand. For political communication, the audience, broadly conceived, is essentially the public and public opinion. For media companies, knowing what shows, books, music, and films audiences will like is a vital element. And in scholarly communications research, the trend in audience studies in recent years has been towards seeing the audience as increasingly active in how it makes sense of the world and uses media. And so in this space, we're moving away from media effects to where the audience member or the receiver is very passive. We're moving to a space now in more current research where the audience member may kind of be passive, but they're more active than passive, right? Some audience members who may not have a great sense of media literacy accept some things, while others who see the same type of media or engage in the same type of media are more able to identify and communicate what they feel and what they think, especially with the utilization of social media. So, uses and gratifications. Uses and gratification research looks at why people use particular media. It examines what people do with media rather than what media do to people. Popular in the 1970s and 80s, uses and gratifications research posits that people have certain needs, especially psychological needs, which they seek to satisfy through media usage. This research makes the basic claims that A, people use the media actively for their own purposes, B, people know what those purposes are and can articulate them. And C, despite individual difference in media use, basic common patterns exist among people. Encoding and decoding is another way in which we view audiences and we try to understand audiences in media research and theory. So, the encoding and decoding model developed by Stuart Hall in the 1970s launched what is known as the active audience approach. Our response to dissatisfaction with previous media effects research, it tries to examine audiences within larger sociocultural contexts, meaning it tries to look at people based on race, class, gender, based on demographic alignment, based on education experiences, and a myriad of other sociocultural factors that typically researchers did not care about. Reception analysis. Reception analysis was a major breakthrough in audience research in a number of respects. First, it assumed that audience members actively make meaning from the media they consume. Second, researchers looked at popular entertainment such as soap operas, women's magazines, and romance novels rather than traditional news or other serious programming studied in earlier years. Thirdly, the areas of study allowed feminists and other scholars to study women in the media and women in active consumers of media. And so, what's really important about reception analysis is this is where we start to see the really cool research kind of come about. So we're able to not only study TV, but we're able to study things like love and hip hop. We're able to study Twitter usage. We're able to study music videos. We're able to study hip hop lyrics. So reception analysis kind of paved the way for that because at the time, the main subset of researchers were white men and white women, right? So with reception analysis, if you're taking this encoding and decoding approach, first instituted by Stuart Hall, who was essentially a black man, he was Jamaican, reception analysis made room for other scholars of color, people to study these things that they experience. It also opened the floodgates for people to start studying the LGBTQ community, and to start exploring things about sexual habits and more gender related issues. So this was a really, really great and important time. And so finally, framing, and we talked about this in chapter 2, but framing is basically the presentation and communication of a message in a particular way that influences our perception of it. So, how is something created in the news studio? When you watch a reality TV show, do you really think that that's really what's going on, or do you take into account the scenes are edited, that people are asked to act in a certain way? Do you take into account that certain channels focus on certain types of demos, or certain types of groups? Do you pay attention to the advertisements that you see when you're watching BET or VH1 versus those ads that you see when you're watching logos, or when you're watching CNN or an ABC affiliate? So framing takes into account how the media is made and how what's being made actually impacts us. Another area of framing that's pretty new within the last 8 or 9 years is utilizing hashtags. How do hashtags help to frame what we study and help us to understand or make judgments about certain types of messages? Profile pictures is another thing. And I'm sure as we continue to move, we continue to grow in this field, we'll see that people will actually continue to start studying memes and what that means, and how memes essentially are framing devices for different types of audiences. So, cultural studies, this is an interdisciplinary framework for studying communication that rejects the scientific approach while investigating the role of culture in creating and maintaining social relations and systems of power. Cultural studies was also essentially instituted by Stuart Hall, who we just spoke of, and this was definitely a space for marginalized and stagnated people to actually study. So if you were a black woman, if you were a black man, if you were a Muslim woman, you were a Muslim man, if you're a member of the LGBTQ community, if you were a person who felt like you were not in control and that you were a minority, cultural studies was essentially a space where we studied those types of groups and where we continue to study those types of groups. Ideology then is a comprehensive and normative body of ideas and the standards held by an individual or group. Basically, an ideology is the way that you think about something. It's your theory of why you think things are the way that they are. And ideologies are impacted by the roles that we play in our families. They're impacted by how we were reared, how we were brought up, our environment. They're impacted by our morals and value systems. And then obviously our ideologies are impacted by our education, right? And our ability to understand concepts. And so within this most recent presidential election, we got to see a lot of different types of ideologies, some of which people thought that did not exist, others which we probably knew existed, but maybe not to the magnitude of which they were demonstrated. We also see that ideologies come really apparent when we're looking at public figures, and also when we think about religion and the different things that if you are part of a religious space, what you should do and how you should be acting. Most recently, I guess some people at least, are upset at Kanye West for admitting that if he had voted, which he said he didn't, that he would have voted for Trump. And so, he is sharing his ideology, and as people will do, they disagree with your ideology if that does not align with what they believe. So it'll be interesting to see how the sharing of his ideology will pan out for him, will pan out for his fans. So finally, as we kind of sum up for at least these videos, what our research in media theory and research studies permits and what we're allowed to do, I would say that we have an open opportunity to basically study anything we want. And so as you see as you're reading your text, it talks a lot about how we blend a lot of what we do in media theory and research with other disciplines. So like psychology, sociology, anthropology, education, and even the hard physical sciences. And there are also different types of views on the way we look at data and the way that we look at phenomenon or phenomena, what happens in the world, and how we analyze that from a media theory and research space. And if you continue to take more classes in Mass Comm, you'll find that we have an actual class that goes more in depth with media theory and research. But for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to spare you some of that. So the two areas that I do want us to pay attention to are quantitative and qualitative research. So first, quantitative research is a method of inquiry favored in the physical sciences that focuses on numerical and statistical measures to describe phenomena. So oftentimes if we do a study in quantitative research, we'll find that that study will possibly be through the form of a survey, or we may have a questionnaire with the Likert scale where people fill things out. It's totally numerical, and from the data that we get from those surveys or from those scales or from those questionnaires, we put that information into a software that is specifically for statistics or that is specifically for numbers, and we are able to draw graphs. We are able to pull information from those to help us to make generalizations or to give us a good idea about whatever we're asking people to help us figure out. Qualitative research, on the other hand, is a method of inquiry favored in the social sciences that explores typically unstructured phenomenon through interviews. And what we mean by unstructured phenomenon, that means like we're dealing with people, we're dealing more with humans. A great way to distinguish quantitative research from qualitative research would be your quantitative research would be you specifically looking at numbers and figures. It's very distant, right? When we're dealing with qualitative, we're dealing with people's emotions, their feelings. We're more person centered, and because of that, we really don't know what we're going to come out with. I myself am a qualitative researcher because I'm really interested in understanding people's feelings and understanding language and studying language and how people communicate in different spaces. So while I have done quantitative research, I think for the type of research I carry out, it's more important to get to know people better and to talk to them in different types of ways to get a better holistic understanding. So I think those help us to distinguish what the difference is between qualitative and quantitative research. And when we think about those impacts or those types of research within media theory, it's important for us to make sure that we have a good understanding of the types of methods that we use. So if we are going to study people and how they feel about love and hip hop, or how do people feel about the TV show Power in comparison to Empire. If you're doing a quantitative study on that, you may just ask random people about how they feel and not really care about how they feel, but care more about the number of people that respond or the number of people that say they like Power versus the number of people say they like Empire. However, if you were doing the same study and you were taking a qualitative research approach, you're going to care why somebody says that they hate Lucius, right? But they love Ghost, okay? Or that they like the way that Empire, actually features real music artists and the songs are available on Apple Music and other sources, versus Power is more so a little bit distant from that. It's more like a drama that does not allow the audience to be involved. So those are just some things to consider when you continue to think about the role of these types of research schools of thought within media theory and research. And so this essentially concludes this PowerPoint in this video for Chapter 12. Continue to read your book, and there is no extra assignment except for you to take your quiz.